All right, why don't we get started? Hi, everybody. I'm Jim McCarthy. I'm the CEO of Gold Star and the host of our expert chat series, which has been focused on live entertainment professionals in every genre and everything you need to know, bringing in people who can really lend their true expertise on the struggle that everybody in the industry of live entertainment, sports, arts is facing, which is how the heck do we deal with the pandemic and all the issues associated with that. And today, I just really think we've got a couple of guests that are going to just wow you. They're coming from a different place from any of the guests we've gotten before, we've had before, for a few reasons, which we'll get into later. But first, I just want to introduce them, and we'll go from there. All right. Our first guest is the president and the chief operating officer of the LA Sparks of the WNBA. Started with the team in the 2019 season. I think that's right. Nina, is that right? Yeah. And with a focus on growth for digital media, community platforms, corporate partnerships, and building a strong organizational structure and staff development, unifying the team around the Sparks mission statement, #, lead the charge. Love it. She, in her first season as president, her strategy culminated in the Sparks winning the 2019 WNBA Business Franchise of the Year Award, but she has been in sports management for a long time. Fayetteville Patriots, which were the first NBA G League team. G League is the developmental league, kind of a minor league of the NBA. And she helped develop the Bakersfield Jam and the WNBA. She's also worked for the Clippers, the LA Clippers, go Clippers, the Washington Mystics, the Phoenix Mercury, the Phoenix Suns. 15 years of experience. She is she's done one of the only people who's served as a sports executive in the WNBA, the NBA, and the NBA G League. And she is really focused on revolutionizing the women's sports business model in a landscape where women's sports receives less than 1% of the sports sponsorship and 4% of the sports media coverage. She's implemented an innovative approach. We'll hear about that. Please welcome Danita Johnson. Danita, thank you for being part of this.
Thank you for having me.
All right. And then also we have from the sports world, Stacy Slaughter. Oops, I was supposed to do that at the end. Introducing. Let's do it in reverse. Stacy is the Executive Vice President of Communications and the Senior Advisor to the CEO of the San Francisco Giants, which is, despite the fact that they're the Giants and we're Dodgers fans around here, one of the best sports franchises in the country, great organization that we've worked with at Gold Star for many years. And Stacy has been at the Giants since '96, all the way back in back at Candlestick. That's
yeah.
Right. Where you had to wear a jacket for
Yes.
games in the summer sometimes. That's right. She oversees brand image messaging, media relations, communication strategy, and crisis management. Also, their charitable endeavors. In 2016, the Giants were named the 2016 Sports Humanitarian Team of the Year by ESPN, which is quite a feat. You were instrumental in actually the move from Candlestick to what was then called Pac Bell Park, and now it's called AT&T Park.
Oracle Park.
What's that?
It's now Oracle Park.
Oh, I can't even keep up.
I know.
Sorry. In 2012, Stacy received Major League Baseball's Robert O. Fischel Award for Ethics, Professionalism, and Humanitarianism, and so many other things. It received the Most Influential Women in Business Award from the San Francisco Business Times and Sports Business Journal's Power Player. Please welcome Stacy Slaughter. Also, TEDx Broadway speaker in 2017.
Thank you.
Stacy Slaughter.
Great to be here.
So great to have you guys. All right, so here's what we're going to do, just to kind of warm people up a little bit. I sort of know the answers that you guys would give. So everybody, look in your chat that down below in Zoom. You know where the chat function is by now. If you don't, then where have you been for the last few months? Set your the thing that says who the message is to all panelists and attendees. And what I want you to do is I want you to type the name of the team that you wish you could go see live right now, that we haven't been able to see games live. I want you to just go and type in the team whose game you wish you could be at right now. I'm seeing the Padres from Paul. That does not surprise me. The Detroit Tigers, any Cleveland team. That's a masochist right there. Washington Nationals, the Senators, the Lakers, the Red Sox, the Eagles, the Mariners, the Angels, the Sparks. Okay, there you go, Danita. You got one. The Sparks. Awesome. Right. I mean, it's the Rockies. Of course, I mean, we're all missing the opportunity. I think baseball in the summer, right? It's sort of all about what summer's all about is baseball. So And that reminds me that as this goes along, we will later on, if you want to ask a question or make a comment into the conversation, just use the chat function or the Q&A function, and we will be able to ask Danita and Stacy what they think about those. I'm going to call this one out just because I don't know what it is, but Mount Alma Mater Hockey. I don't know what that is, but I understand the passion behind, your local league. All right. Okay. So before we do that, as usual, as you know, we do a survey twice a month of Gold Star members, which is a very broad base of ticket buyers to try to get a gauge for what's going on out there with consumers. So I'm going to share my screen now and present the most recent version of that data. Bear with me just a second. All right, cool. This data was collected in the middle of July, and there's another survey that'll be going out at in just a couple of days. But we have been running the Gold Star Consumer Sentiment Survey project for the last several months, and it has two goals. One is to gauge the ongoing sentiment of the event-going public, especially people who go out a lot. It's one thing to do a survey and get a snapshot of where people are, but what we've seen over time is that, in fact, this is a sentiment that changes. It goes in a lot of different directions, up and down, and I think it's really important for us to keep a pulse on the ongoing sentiment. So hopefully we'll see positive change as time goes on. And the second goal is to share that information with all of you and really anybody in the industry who is looking for a way to get back to a safe and prosperous return to live events. The survey itself, we do twice a month. Since May, we've been doing this twice a month at a large scale, big enough that we cover 17 major metros, and we get large numbers of respondents in every age group, which obviously is important during the pandemic. And the people who answer tend to be people who go out a lot. I mean, 69% of them report going out to live events normally at least once or twice a month. So we're talking about the people that are kind of the core of your audience, whether it's a season ticket holder or just the person who shows up all the time. And in this particular survey, we had 3,815 respondents. So again, very large representative sample. And that's the setup. One question that we ask every time that I think is kind of a bellwether, it's a sort of overall number that tells us where people's mindset is what we call the return readiness score. And the return readiness score is a question that we ask that says, how willing, interested, up for it are you to go to live events if they existed right now, if they were being produced, how willing would you be to go? And the survey takers are presented with a slider bar that they can move from 0 to 100, where 100 means I'm all in, let's definitely go, nothing's holding me back, all the way down to 0, which means like no way at all, not happening. And so we take all those numbers and we average them together to give you the return readiness score, which for this period is 34. Not high. So if you see on the dial there, all the way at the bottom is not at all ready, and at the top is definitely ready, and 50 would be sort of, mezzo. 34 is up 2 from last time. So the data that we gathered at the very end of June, this is a slight bounce up from what was then an all-time low of 32. So let's just start there. Stacy and Danita, what do you think? 34.
Who wants to go?
Just jump in.
I'm not surprised.
Like it was high, low, right where it should be. What do you think?
I mean, I think it's in a good place for probably at this point in time of summer and what's been happening, especially over just the last few weeks in multiple markets. Yeah. I wouldn't argue with this number. I think it's probably at a place I would predict it to be.
Yeah.
Stacey?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. We just, Major League Baseball did kind of a similar type surveying of its fans. It's been about a month probably, but it's very consistent with, what your data is showing. I'd be curious to see kind of, it's a +2 since late June, you said, but yeah. Where did you start out in May? Like kind of how is that, has it evolved or has it been pretty consistent?
Yeah, it's actually bounced around a bit. We have a chart we'll do later, but the late June number was the lowest that we'd seen. So this is actually a bit of a bounce off the floor. Not much. I mean, this isn't great, but definitely a bit of a bounce. I mean, the numbers were higher in late May. I think there was that sort of moment of optimism that things were turning around and people just got smacked right down. One of the things that somebody asked for this on this group, and we of course wanted to deliver it, which is, it's not just an average, it's also a breakdown. So everybody's individual answer is one thing and the average is another. So we break it down, and what you see is a sort of different picture, which is that most people's answer is no, right? So the 0 to 10 bar is by far the largest. So most people are just saying no. And there actually aren't that many people in the bar with the average in it, right? So it's not a very common answer. There's more people in the hell yeah, side of the 91 to 100, which, hey, I guess that's out there. So, in terms of the distribution, it's still heavily weighted toward nah, not right now. So let's see. Here's the thing you were asking about, Stacy.
Right.
As you can see, it kind of, it sort of began to climb a bit, and then, has come down rapidly since then.
Yeah, I'm curious. I mean, it'll be interesting to see what your data shows the next go around, given the news and the major surges across, so many different states right now. Things seem to be getting better in the Northeast, where there's obviously a lot of theater, and but in the South, and where you've got college football starting, you've got a lot of different things happening.
Yep.
It's not good, but hopefully we'll get past it.
Yeah, I mean, we had this moment of sort of giddy optimism where we were climbing out, mid-May, early June, mid-June. If you kind of extend that trend line, you had something maybe you could work with. But
I think one thing to add, Jim, during that period was when the restrictions started to get lifted.
yeah,
Right.
So across different states is when the restrictions started to get lifted. So people thought we were okay. So when you see that spike, like early June, like end of May, early June, mid-June, because right in that time period was like the first round of people being like, okay, go back outside.
Yep, that's right. It wasn't really like well-grounded optimism, but there was a weird optimism that people were having. Yeah. Let's see. So we also, this is very interesting. We're breaking it down by metro because it varies a lot. I mean, and Las Vegas has been at the top of this list for a long time, but if those of you who've been on the last two of these, I've called people in Las Vegas various things, including crazy, because the numbers were like 60. It was a little insane. But this is a little more sane at 47, and then Dallas at 47. Both of those numbers previously had been, in the high 50s or low 60s for those two markets, and they've come back to a kind of, I think, a more sensible take on it. Unfortunately, Houston 42. Stacy, you were talking about the cities back east and sort of how they look at this. New York, who in some ways feels like they're coming out of it a bit. I mean, there's still a lot of danger, but still at 39, Chicago 39, Atlanta 39, Sacramento, which had been high up to about, and that's interesting because up to about a month or a month and a half ago, Sacramento was over 50. And I think as this spread has gone more in, inland.
Central Valley. Yep, exactly.
Yeah. LA, this is not the low point for LA, but it's right at the low point for LA at 36. That had been in the low 40s for a while. Philly 36. And then on down from there, San Diego at 35, Boston 33, Phoenix 33. Phoenix used to be a high number too. I think the Phoenix was at 50 about 6 weeks ago. People in other territories than these are 32. And then the really low ones, slightly surprising to see Seattle. And I mean, I don't know if it's surprising. Nothing surprises me. DC had been the lowest number of all for every survey until this one. DC had been consistently the lowest one, but not anymore. Bay Area, 27, and San Jose, 26. So San Francisco, East Bay, 27, San Jose, 26. Is that how it's feeling up there to you?
I think because we were one of the first areas to shut everything down, that I think, and people started adopting mask policies early, that I think, there's probably a mentality is like, okay, this is serious business. We need to really, because our, public health officials and our mayors and, they had really kind of, hammered these messages into us. And then the sports teams started, to reinforce the whole importance of, social distancing and things. So that doesn't surprise me. I know we have a big mountain to climb, when it is safe for us to go back. But I think that's probably keeping in line with what the messaging has been in the Bay Area really since, early March.
Yeah, it's gotten more pessimistic relative to the other markets in the Bay Area. That was they were. I agree with you. There was always a sort of caution, but now it's like on the low end of it. So you can see there's variation by market, but it's not crazy variation. It's not like there are people in the markets in the 80s and markets that are zeros. So interesting. This really, one thing I want to say is that we have not had people who generally work in very large venues the way that the two of you do. So that'll be a really interesting part of the conversation. We ask people the same question, except we specify venue size, and we get a different answer for small, medium, and large venues, which we define, less than 250 to 5,000, and then 5,000 plus. And so you can see, and this is probably no surprise, I'll let you guys speak for yourselves on this, but large venues at 19 is a lot lower than 34.
Did you happen to look at like indoor versus outdoor or anything?
Yeah, we have a question that focuses on that. Let's see. We'll get to that. So hang on just a second, Stacey. We'll come to that. That's a good point.
I think one of the things from the large venue to the small venue piece of that, I would say, I feel like mentally a lot of people from a small venue standpoint feel like they can probably be in a little bit more control from what that experience looks like for them as individuals, because a sports experience, when you go to large venues, you're not really in control of that situation. But when you go to smaller, medium-sized venues as a consumer, you're going to feel like I'm a little more control of my spacing and opportunity. I think one of the other things that would be considered is like how people enter and exit the building, and like the concessionary experiences when you go into the large venues, I think it's things that we talk about constantly of like, what does that experience actually look like? Yeah. Do you bring people in waves? Do you, is it like timed out by, let's say on their digital ticket, it actually has a time slot of when they're allotted window to actually enter buildings so that you have a better entryway that way. I think there's lots of things that you can look at that really help to bring this together. And then when people also think large venues, they think sitting right next to each other. And I know many venues are large scale right now are looking at what do seating options actually look like. Even from us from a ticketing side, yes, we can go on sale, but can we guarantee seat location? Probably not. Can I guarantee pricing location? Yes. And so I think those are all things that kind of play into the factor that the consumer needs to hear what the game plan is per venue to truly understand what's going on.
Yeah, I get what you're saying about feeling in control of the experience, because you feel like if you're, let's say you're in a, like a comedy club or a small, you just feel like you could just walk out. You're just like,
when you make a dinner reservation right now, if you make a dinner reservation, you'll be separated. You'll be it's not crowded. You're not in a bar. It's a very different kind of experience. And I think it's almost like you could compare this to being like, I'm going to dinner, I'm going to a bar. And that's like a small venue versus a large venue of a perception in the mind of the consumer.
Also the smaller venues, to your point about control, is almost easier to manage, like a restaurant. I mean, I think of small colleges versus the large universities. These small colleges are able to get everybody on campus and test regularly and do all these things, where trying to do a large university and that it's just, it's unreasonable to expect that. And so I do think this issue around control is, one that's going to be, something that's probably going to drive consumer behavior for quite a long time.
Yeah. All right, I want to come back to some of the venue size issues, because I think there's a lot of useful information in that. But let's go through the age. The age data has been consistent in that the younger crowd, 35 and under crowd, is more willing to go out. I don't think anyone's surprised by that, given the role of age and how the virus impacts people. Middle-aged people, pretty close really in number, and the score is not that different from younger people. And then senior citizens 65 and up, 25. So they're substantially less interested in taking this on. Probably no shock. What's the average? What's the sort of core fan base for Major League Baseball in person, Stacey? Is it 40?
It's in that middle age range, although, we do have we have an aging fan base, and I would assume that's pretty, and I think I recall when we were doing the TEDx work together, it was almost kind of similar to the theater world a bit as well.
Yeah. How about the WNBA, Danita? Is that, I feel like it's a very family oriented sale in a lot of cases, but.
Yeah, we'll be anywhere between that mid 20s to late 30s, early 40s kind of a range.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So I think, the older folks showing how wise they are by responding properly to this, saying, that's not anytime soon. So let me ask you a question, slight modification on the original question. Suppose that you knew that there were certain policies such as strict cleaning routines, social distancing, that kind of thing. Would it affect your answer to the question of how ready are you to return? And the answer is yes. Goes from a 34 to a 43. Still not a high number, but a little up from last time, which was 42 for this number. It's funny, and something you mentioned earlier, Danita, is really true. We had a virologist, our friend Dr. Vincent Raccaniello from Columbia, on in the last one, I think it was. And he said, people should get over the idea of it's not the size of the venue. Mostly it's the distance between people in the venue. So this is kind of a similar thing, but there is some psychology here about that for sure.
Yeah. I would think too, it's almost like airlines too. You're seeing that some airlines are starting to fill middle seats and some airlines are sticking with keeping, middle seats. I just read today, Southwest has decided they're not going to wipe down arm rests and things in between flights because, and I think it's the same, there's a real opportunity for venues to, almost differentiate itself in terms of the communications to its fans about safety, health and safety measures that they're taking, on a regular basis. And I actually just jotted that down as a note that communications is clearly, a key element to that.
Definitely is.
This is a way, it's a tough situation, but this is an opportunity as venues and teams and those that own their venues. We have the chance to potentially come in and kind of revolutionize what the consumer experience looks like. And sometimes in the midst of these situations in life, this is where you got to find gratitude and find ways to incorporate opportunity for change to further push your business. And I think the venue experience is definitely one of them. You see what we've done, like you look at MLS and what they've done with the suites on the field and what that looks like. And, outside of just a traditional suite. So like you can create unique experience opportunities, and it doesn't just go for sporting. It goes for anybody from, I know we talked prior to coming on, just like all these different venues, whether it's theater or whatever it may be, having an opportunity to kind of change what the consumer experience looks like versus the traditional. We're all going through it with how we work. Why not how we experience actually live events? And I think that has to be the approach once people kind of got through the, oh my God, this is happening. It has to be, how are you innovative in the space at this point?
No doubt.
Yeah.
Stacey, I think you asked about outdoor events.
Mm-hmm.
So the good news for baseball, I suppose, is that it's an outdoor event. So we asked people, okay, describe your willingness to go out to live events in locations or venues that are outdoors, like gardens or zoos, I suppose baseball stadiums, or that don't require patrons to be seated near each other, like museums and aquariums. So this is kind of like, there's a seated traditional event, but then there's also this kind of stuff. And the willingness to do this is a lot higher. So the willingness to do this is 54 currently, up one from last time. And at one point, I think this was as high as maybe 65. So this has come down, but it's certainly still a lot higher than the idea of a seated, traditionally seated indoor venue.
Yeah. It's interesting too, before the whole pandemic happened, we were finding that as a trend in, at least in our venue or Major League Sports or baseball venues. I don't know if it's the same in the WNBA or NBA, that people don't want to sit in a fixed seat as much as they want to be able, and maybe it's also the pace of baseball and how that works. Like they want to be able to congregate in areas where there may be a bar and they can kind of gather with friends and watch the game, and the game's part of the backdrop of the social experience. And so looking at this information, it's actually, my mind is, clicking away, thinking about different ways that we can, when the time is right to go back, really create more of those gathering spaces that people can experience both the game and a social experience at the same time without having to sit, side by side in a seat.
Yeah. Yeah. We started asking this question last time, I think, again, at the request of somebody in the group. Personally, how willing would you be to wear a mask or face covering during an event, including before and after the show? And Danita, that goes to your point about the concessions and all that stuff. And the overall answer is 87. So a high average, but then really logical question to follow that is, okay, break it down, right? It's not really so much the average as it is how many people are going to create a problem with the venue, right? Which the answer to that is there are people, and you can see this down here on the low end, there's a significant group that's like, I'm not doing it. Now that may be people who wouldn't go because of that, or it may be people who get there and then you have a sort of staff issue with dealing with people who won't follow a mask rule. But I guess the good news is there's all these people up here.
I think there's a couple things to this. I think there has to be give and take. If the consumer needs us to change, we need the consumer to be willing to make changes. And so for us to have actual live events, we have to have balance between the two. So when I look at the extreme list here of I wouldn't attend because of this, we're also saying, but we made these concessions so you are able to attend. So this is the ask that we need in order to have this set up. And I think it all goes back to how we communicate that. And I think that's across the board from a sports landscape or entertainment live events landscape. We're having this and when we first started going back and I looked at the first piece, you saw all the stuff happening in restaurants, right? People had to close their business down after 2 days because people were just doing whatever and not following rules. And they saw the immediate impact. I think that's where sometimes we have to take a stance as operators, venues, teams to be like, this is where we have to draw the line for overall safety. And it's not about calling out individuals. It's about the overall experience for everybody. So I think that's in my mindset of how I approach that from a communication standpoint outwardly. And I think if you have unification amongst leagues and teams and whatever venue you work in, I think that's the key. If there's people that aren't and we're all under the same umbrella, it throws it off. So it's kind of what you saw with the states, right? When people went outside and other states were still inside, it caused all the chaos. Yeah. And so it has to be a unified front and an understanding amongst all teams and leagues.
And also just a sense that if we all do this, it makes a difference, right? Like that really matters a lot.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think about when we started having to do bag checks and people walking through magnetometers, that was a big change for us. We're trying to make this a welcoming environment, yet we're doing bag checks and we're having everybody go through metal detectors when they come into a sporting event. And, and over time people adopt. I mean, look at how public sentiment has changed so much dramatically around mask wearing in the past, 4 weeks too.
Stacey, was that post 9/11 that started?
No, it was even after 9/11. I mean, it was within the last decade or so. Yeah, I can't remember what the event was that triggered it, but yeah, no.
For us, it was 9/11. I think when we started doing it.
Yeah.
It that timing, because that's when everything changed. You also think about the epidemic of years and years ago, you used to go to the doctor and your doctor didn't wear gloves every time they touched you, and then the AIDS epidemic happened and the whole transition of wearing gloves and how your actual appointments looked and felt became completely different. And so when these things happen in life, we have to adjust as people, and we're just living through the midst of the change.
It's funny. I was just thinking about airports in the 80s, when I was a kid, kid, you just walk in.
Yeah. No IDs. You didn't check your ID. You just had a ticket.
Yep. You could walk all the way with your friend right up to the gate and sit there and, wave to them as they got on the plane. But that changed, obviously. All right. And then the last question that we ask, mostly just to make ourselves feel better, is the looking forward score. How much are you looking forward to being able to go to live events, sports, entertainment, and arts again in the future? And the answer is 87. This is our all-time high. We're excited about this. We needed to get to 100, but nonetheless, that's encouraging. All right. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we will get into is everybody back? We're all good?
Yep.
Okay. Get out of that, and here we go. All right. So I want to encourage you to if you have a question or a comment or something that you'd like Danita or Stacy to talk about, please put it in the Q&A box or in the in just the chat. We'll find it one way or the other. So please do that. In the meantime, I just think we raised so many interesting conversations in the interesting topics in talking about that data. Which one do you guys want to pick up on first? I just like Danita. I like your whole thing about adapting. You know, it's a moment to adapt.
You want me to
Tell us
expand
about
on
the.
that? Is there a question? I was like,
I do have a
wait.
question. Well, I do have a question, which is tell us about the MLS suites that you mentioned.
I mean, you saw it. LAFC has it. A couple other newer venues. You see the suites on the field, so they're right there, like on the pitch. You see them down low, where traditionally you had the suites up high. I think Miami, the Miami Dolphins, when they built their new stadium, they actually did lower level suites on the like right there on the field side versus just like the top level suites of traditional space. So like in these new venues, as Stacey had mentioned, like they're creating new gathering spaces. So like how the suite experience looks, how like at Nats Park in DC, that whole outfield area with all the different concession areas on the back end and what that looks like, you feel like you're at a food festival. And then outside the venue, there's a whole like on the weekends, they have a festival outside. So it's like this combination of creating unique spaces for people to gather. But it can also be a great way to create unique spaces that create division in a good way for the actual physical distancing. Yeah. Can't talk, I can't get the word out. But yeah, so I think there's ways that we can all work together to find spaces like that. And for most of us that have been to sporting events or other events, we all love what is considered a little bit of luxury. And I think if it's positioned that way that creates uniqueness for the consumer, you have a great opportunity.
So one of the things I think that one of the most interesting things about the organizations that you guys are part of, and I think some people on the call are going to be envious of, is you're actually you're doing it right now. You're doing events. There are no fans, but you're doing it. So talk a little bit about what that's like. And I think it gets into the issue of how do you keep your players safe, you know, the equivalent of performers. Let's just talk about the experience of having events going on. So we've got baseball. Yeah, we have baseball back and both the NBA and WNBA back. Different approaches, slightly different approaches. Talk about that a bit.
Yeah, so I mean, baseball looked at a variety of different options and ended up with not the bubble scenario, given the number of people on teams and, you know, just the logistics going into that, and also the lack of availability of kind of ballparks near each other. And you could do something in Arizona potentially, but you know, it's 116 degrees there, you know, on a regular day in July, so probably not the most conducive. So, you know, the way it's approached it is it's kind of basically divided the folk. We have very restrictive numbers of people who can be in the building at any time, and they're basically in different tiers. So there's tier 3, which are the folks who kind of operate the ballpark, the camera operators, ballpark operations, grounds crew, everybody. They don't have any access with the players at all. Tier 2 are the coaches, media relations staff, trainers, and folks who would have direct contact with the players. And then finally, tier 1 would be our playing team. And to show you how restrictive that is, in tier 2, there are only 35 tier 2 people who are affiliated with the Giants. And so it's a very restrictive group. And all 3 of those tiers are subject to regular testing. In the case of the players, it's every other day. In the case of tier 2, it's pretty frequent, if you know, pretty similar to that. And then tier 3, it's at least weekly. And you know, and so and then obviously there's a 67-page rule book that Major League Baseball produced in negotiations with the Players Association around social distancing and all of those different protocols to follow. We had to expand our clubhouses. We moved our weight weight room facilities, workout facilities into different parts of the ballpark where they're open air. We built batting cages. We just completely reconfigured the ballpark so that there was enough social distancing while the players were training and as they were playing games. So, fortunately for us, we've been pretty lucky. Our players have been very, very taking this very seriously. They wear masks for the most part if they're in the dugout and things like that. But, there's no guarantees. It's just like in the rest of the country.
What about the players just, off hours? What are there restrictions on them? Because they're not in the bubble. We'll talk about the bubble in a second, but.
So they're not in the bubble. When they are traveling on the road, they're in their hotels and they're not technically supposed to leave. They can order room service. They can order like Grubhub or something to be delivered, but they're really limited. They're not really supposed to be out at all, not even in the hotel common areas. They'll set up kind of designated areas where a team can be, together, but not in public areas. When they're at home, home, they can be home with their families. Again, we have asked them to be very, very vigilant about social distancing and and constantly hand sanitizing, mask wearing, and things like that. So it's quite an experiment, but we've had some big outbreaks on two specific teams, but if you look at the overall, the number of tests that we've performed, it's a very limited percentage of positive rates overall. But obviously there were two significant outbreaks on two teams.
Marlins and the
Cardinals.
Yeah. Okay, so then let's talk, Danita, tell us about the bubble. Some people might even know what the heck we're talking about. It's not an actual bubble, although that would be kind of cool. Tell us about the bubble.
Yeah, I think a lot of what Stacey said is similar to what we've done. I think one of the biggest reasons why we went into a bubble scenario, because we've discussed many options prior to making that final decision, is one of the things is about player safety and travel. For us on the W side, we don't travel privately from market to market. And so the travel experience of teams going through airports, traveling from market to market is just, it's an unsafe situation of passing things along. So within that, in the bubble scenario, it also gave us an opportunity to get the season in within a specific window. You're lessening travel. Also, the travel back-to-back on the bodies is really tough. And so we're able to then execute games. Our players are tested pretty much every single day. They go to testing. We have very few people that are tier 1. And that's pretty much just what you have is your team, your basketball ops staff, and we have like 1 or 2 business people per team that are there. And everything else is just really them running games. We are on site at IMG in Florida. And so we've been able to consistently run games. We started almost 2 weeks ago. Teams are playing almost every other day. They get a couple of days off in between. But I think it's working. I think, in the beginning, it's always just, it's like I said about, wearing masks. It's something that's a little bit different, but I feel like, they have the opportunity to live in villas or they can live in a hotel. So they have options. They have options on meals. There's meals that are provided every day, or they can opt in for like getting their meal, like per diem for food and things of that nature. So it gives them a good opportunity on that side. One of the big things I think, I was actually having this conversation earlier today, which people don't really think about as much, is from the women's side and on the men's side. But specifically on the women's side, is that they had to opt in to bring their children. So some of our athletes are mothers. And so they have their kids down there with them as well. And it's interesting because I'm watching these scenarios and I haven't seen that brought up in any conversation across the board when it comes to the men. But these are the pressures and the differentiations that these female athletes are actually going through and what they have to address about even making the decision to go into the bubble and what that looks like. And so that's why you see, I think you have players that opt in and opt out. Not just because of kids, but there's multiple reasons, even from a mental health standpoint. That was a big focus of the leagues, to have somebody on site from a mental health standpoint, to be in one location like that for a long period of time. Definitely is something we want to make sure that we're ahead of.
Yeah.
That's a really good point. One of our star players, Buster Posey, he ended up opting out because he and his wife adopted twin girls who were born prematurely, and right as we were starting spring training and the girls, and so he made the decision, because of the risk, to not play this year. It's a really good point.
So it's really interesting. And I think it's a useful concept that could potentially be adapted. This idea of tiers of people
Yes.
with different levels of access. So it sounds like there's a similar system in the in the WNBA and the NBA system as well.
Yes, that's yeah. Everybody has tiers, and I think same from the MLB side. It's tiers of access.
Yeah.
And that concept could be played with for anybody. You know, if you were thinking about, you know, theater or something like that, you could actually create a system that isn't that different from this in the same way, right? I mean, it's useful.
Yeah, you have your actors and, you know, all your actors that have a certain clearance, the directors, those that have to be there versus people that do hair, makeup, what it may look like. You can tier them out from an exposure and areas that they're allowed to access.
Yeah, Sarah Bauer mentions that it's the same in the entertainment industry, but what I haven't seen so far that I'm expecting to see is a kind of bubble scenario in theater. I think that is viable. I think you could sort of remove to a location, control who's there, and, you know, produce something. I mean, I would love to see that. And I think more and more people are going to hear me advocating for online events for different reasons, but I think that kind of thing could be created, and it could be very lucrative.
And I know, I mean, they just released, and I know it's a phenomenon, but like they just released Hamilton on Disney, right? And I sat like 2 weekends ago and watched Hamilton for 3 hours, and I was like, man, I missed the theater. And it was just that moment of being like, I wish I could watch more on television in this moment, knowing that one day I'll get to go back.
Well, and so far, there's been online events on the music side very successfully. So obviously, BTS did the concert to 750,000 people. $18 million gross on a 90-minute show. Amazing. Josh Groban's done some shows. There's been some shows. And then with Hamilton and stuff like that on the theater and performing arts side, it's been more old content being brought forward with some exceptions. But I feel like, you know, there's something to be learned from this idea of creating this environment that's a little bit separate, that's controlled, that's protected. You could actually produce some new content in that way, I think. But so far, no one's really...
And I think there's a real opportunity for audience development. You know, I think we talked about this when you guys were doing TEDx Broadway about how do you expand audiences? How do you make it more accessible with, you know, ticket prices being what they are? It's a big issue. We dealt with it, you know, in sports as well. And, you know, how do you get people more engaged? I mean, the viewership of that Hamilton release was phenomenal. And, you know, and I had seen it live, and then to watch it again, you know, and I even watched with the subtitles so I could, you know, catch every word and things like that. I mean, you're experiencing it in a totally different way. But I also think for kids and younger people who may not have access to theater, you know, particularly Broadway theater, you know, there's just a huge opportunity to, and we're seeing that a lot in baseball too, that I think there's such a desperate desire for live events that you're getting more kids involved in fantasy leagues and things like that just because they want to engage with, you know, kind of a live experience.
We've seen that too. This is, I mean, it took a pandemic. I'll just leave it at that. But this is the first time we've had this many WNBA games on national television since the league started.
Awesome.
I mean, the fact that every other day I can go on television and watch a game, it is what it is. We had a 63% increase in viewership in the opening weekend. And so when we talk about, and we're only in 12 markets, so when we're limited to our markets and we have limited national exposure that's inconsistent across the board, and then you're only catching it here or there, you can't develop new fans. So I also see this season as an opportunity for us, from how we are on television, the visual experience, getting to know our players, storytelling, content pieces, that they're all in this space together. And as a league, it's something that we have an opportunity to capitalize on, to tell these stories, to really get these games viewed, have people talking about the conversation, not even on top of the social justice movement that's being brought by these players and the different things that they're doing. I think there's just so much opportunity of space to grow. And I think not only in sports, but like you said, in theater, there's multiple ways that I think industries that have been limited in audience size due to location and reach now have a chance to do something different if they just move forward.
Yeah, so Raul mentions in the chat that Hamilton and certainly Major League Baseball have resources, right? So that when you talk about resource constraints, which many smaller venues face, what do you think about that? Like, how do we deal with that reality?
Well, I mean, I think the idea of repurposing content, I mean, obviously not everything's been filmed, and, you know, but if there are opportunities, I also think there's an opportunity to think differently about how you utilize technology like Zoom, for example. You know, when we shut down, and this is like, did not cost anything, we said, how are we going to stay engaged with our season ticket holders, and then in a larger way, our fans as a whole on a weekly basis? So we gathered our radio and television broadcasters who are beloved in our market, and we did a weekly Chalk Talk on Zoom, just like we're doing right now. And we invited our 5,000 season ticket accounts, and we streamed it on YouTube, and our season ticket holders were able to ask questions and get kind of a behind the scenes look. And we would bring guests on, like our manager is new to the team, so we brought him on a lot, former players, current players, and just talked baseball, because there was such a strong desire amongst our audience and our fans to just have a conversation about baseball. And, you know, we would get 600 or 700 viewers. Now, you're not monetizing that, but you're building audience, and you're maintaining and you're sustaining your audience. And I just think there's opportunities, you know, in that way to engage with fans or theater lovers or whomever in a totally different way. I mean, Zoom before this pandemic was not really on my radar. You know, I never Zoomed in, and now I think it's become people have adapted to it in varying ways. And we're talking about continuing to do that now that we're even playing baseball, is to have that ongoing conversation, if you will.
So by the way, I just want to mention that over the next coming weeks, we're going to dig into this issue of online events much more deeply. And for those of you who are asking right now in the chat, like, how do we operationalize this in a smaller setting or in a theater setting? We're going to get there. I think one thing that we wanted to do today was just get the benefit of Stacy and Danita, who are kind of on the front edge of actually getting the product back into market. So we will dig into that more. Raul had a question, but Sarah also mentioned this whole idea that sometimes it's pre-existing legal things that.
And I just saw that too, and I just want to say, like, just, you know, I think both Stacy and I probably could agree to this. We don't believe that it's simple. So to Sarah's point, I don't think that it's easy. Trust me, it was not easy for us to be in Florida, and every day things still come up that we have to address. So this is not an easy process. We don't take it faint to heart to be like, oh, you can just pop up and do this, or all these venues can just pop up and be successful at it. We're still figuring it out as we go. So I just want to be super clear about that. Like, this is not easy. We're trying to figure it out. I think for my standpoint, and maybe Stacey, please feel free to jump in on this, is that we're just trying to express opportunities of which we've seen so far to date, and things that we're having dialogue within our own organizations and our own leagues to hopefully have opportunity to grow. But do we have it all figured out? No. Can everything cross over? Absolutely not. But I think what we're just trying to do is kind of talk about the things that we've seen that connected. And so, yes, there's going to be, you know, for us, we can't play certain music during the broadcast. So It's a limitation for us. So there are things like that we do deal with. There's things where we can't have certain partner logos in a national broadcast, where we're now limited about how much our partners were actually paying us previously because of that. So there's adjustments that we're also having to make and kind of go day by day on and try to make good on. So yes, we do have those type of things. It's not all roses.
Yeah. No, you're right. It's one thing to say, hey, you can invent and be ingenious and work around it, but that doesn't mean that's easy. That's
no.
Right.
You know, and the other point that Sarah made about, you know, whether it was composers, lyricists, and other people who had contracts that make this hard on Broadway, one hopes that maybe this is actually, the pandemic is sort of a doorway into some more flexibility on stuff like that. And that applies, like you're saying, like all of a sudden national sponsors are saying, hey, you know, you can't put that on. So one hopes that, you know, some of those things that maybe are in the way of changes that need to happen can somehow take lead.
And I mean, obviously we had to go through a very public and protracted player negotiation about, you know, getting back on the field, which is always fun. But, you know, I do think that, you know, my theory, as many people are, is never let a good crisis go to waste, and trying to think of, I mean, the thing that's been, you know, I think really good for our organization from an internal perspective, set aside the fan issue for a second, is just we are working very differently. I mean, as Danita talked about, you know, you've got your limited number of people who can physically be in the ballpark. Our offices are in the ballpark. So our 300-person employee group is still work from home because people are not allowed to be in the ballpark. And so, you know, and it's really having us think differently about how we interact as an employee group, and how we work differently together. And, you know, and it's a challenge, but at the same time, I think it's opened our world up to, you know, different possibilities in terms of how we operate as an organization and how we become much more adaptable to this changing environment.
And the W doesn't have deep pockets, Raul. I'll tell you that.
That's right.
Shane, we don't.
Don't generalize too much about sports because it varies from league to league.
And we're generating very little revenue this year, but we've had to adapt with our sponsors. I mean, our only real source of revenue right now is potential sponsor development. And how do we reimagine those sponsorships in this environment when it's made for TV only, has been a big challenge.
All right. Well, I want to thank Danita and Stacy for this. It's been great. I think it's been a really helpful look in how you guys are handling a very unusual thing. I mean, I think we're going to look back on the bubble and things like that in the future and go like, do you remember the bubble? You know, you know, I think about the guys who are, you know, playing their first season in the league, and, you know, oh yeah, when I was a rookie, we didn't have any fans. And the young guys will be saying like, what? There were no fans? They're like, yeah, it was weird, man. So I do think that, you know, not everything applies one-to-one to other scales of organizations or genres, but I do think that there's always a lot to learn from talking across genres and that kind of thing. We are going to dig into the possibilities for online events for other genres in coming weeks and at different scales. So hold on, we'll dig into that a bit more, because I do think the opportunities are there. So until then, we're going to keep surveying, keep reporting what people are saying for sure, and having more experts like Stacy and Danita on the chat. And of course, the Show Up group on Facebook is still there. And please join there. We'll post this replay there probably tomorrow, Friday if we could, and if we can't, and then otherwise we'll just keep sharing everything we learn. We're all in this together. We all want the industry to be fully back. We want people to be in the stands cheering or in the audience, you know, watching the shows. I speak for myself only, but I imagine others are like me and saying that I just can't wait for this to go back to the way it was, and with some new possibilities on top of that as well. So, Danita, Stacy, thanks again. This was great.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thanks everybody. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Crachez-vous dessus, il est encore temps.